well after the facts were known, U.S. News and World Report had a long and enthusiastic story with the headline, "Indonesia, Hope Where There Once Was None." Time magazine had a cover story which celebrated the West's best news for years in Asia. The heading was "Vengeance with a Smile," had 5 full pages of text and 6 more of pictures devoted to what it called the boiling bloodbath that almost unnoticed took 400,000 lives. It then informed us that the new army regime which carried this out is scrupulously constitutional, based on law and not mere power. The authority was General Suharto, its quietly determined leader with his almost innocent face. The New York Times featured a column headed "A Gleam of Light in Asia." It's by its leading political commentator, the highly revered James Reston, who said that we should not let the bad news in Vietnam displace the more hopeful developments in Asia, primary among them being what he called the savage transformation of Indonesia from a pro-Chinese policy under Sukarno to a defiantly anti-communist policy under General Suharto. He said, Washington is being careful not to claim any credit for this change in one of the most richest countries in the world, but this does not mean that Washington had nothing to do with it. He said, it is doubtful that the coup would ever have been attempted without the American show of strength in Vietnam, or been sustained without the clandestine aid it received indirectly from here. So we should be very proud that our government contributed to the greatest slaughter since the days of Hitler and Stalin. Editorial reaction generally was the same. Suharto went on to compile one of the worst human rights records in the world at home, along with slaughter in West Papua, the invasion and slaughter in East Timor, and so on. The West remained quite pleased. In 1987, the Christian Science Monitor observed correctly that many in the West were keen to cultivate Jakarta's new moderate leader. Suharto is moderate because he only slaughters people for our benefit. The London Economist added that despite appearances, this great mass murderer and torturer is, they said, at heart benign. That's referring doubtless to his attitude towards Western corporations, which is indeed very benign. With respect to Timor, the reaction was quite the same. You've heard a number of things about the, I mentioned, say, Moynihan's expression of the government position. As far as press coverage is concerned, in 1974 and 75, there was quite a lot of coverage of Timor in the context of fears about what was going to happen with Portuguese decolonization. Then when Indonesia invaded and started the slaughter, the press coverage started to decline. It reached a flat zero in 1978 as the slaughter reached genocidal levels, with new flows of aid from the U.S. government because Indonesia was actually running out of arms. So the Carter administration took a little time off from moral lessons about human rights to ensure that the slaughter would be completely genocidal. What press coverage there was endless lies, repeating either State Department or Indonesian propaganda. So, for example, Henry Kam, the leading New York Times Southeast Asia correspondent and an old Asia hand, he claimed that, his words, many Timorese have been forced to live under control of the Fretilin guerrillas, but they're now fleeing to areas where they can be protected by the Indonesian government. His authority was Indonesian generals. Even the worst Stalinist party hack rarely descended to that. Kam adds that there's some protests about East Timor, but he said these are just an attempt by highly vocal left-wing students in Australia to bash the West. You will recall that this is the old Asia hand. Others were pretty much the same. The press flatly refused to interview refugees. There were thousands of them in Lisbon and thousands more in Australia. In desperation, some of those refugees were brought to the United States in the late 70s. Actually, I brought a group of them myself. Zero effect. Nobody would interview them. William Shawcross was trying to justify the dramatic difference in reaction to the slaughter in East Timor and the one in Cambodia at the same time, comparable slaughter. And he said, well, he's going to give a structurally serious reason for this. It was too hard to gain access to refugees from Timor. That is, you couldn't expect a British journalist to take the trip all the way from London to Lisbon instead of, say, taking that hourly shuttle to the Thai-Cambodia border. So it goes on. I'll read you a few things from the State Department. Robert Oakley, in 1977 hearings said there are probably under 10,000 casualties. Indonesia at the same time estimated them at 50 to 80,000. Oakley's 10,000 figure was then repeated by Robert Chaplin in the New Yorker. He said there are no serious atrocities, few excesses by units that got out of control, just like this time. Commanders called back to Indonesia and punished. 78 hearings. We've been on the right track in encouraging Indonesia to do a better job in assisting the people of the territory who are fleeing from federal control to areas where they can be protected by the Indonesian government. Remember, this is when the massacre's reaching genocidal levels. The State Department legal advisor informed Congress with a straight face that the incorporation of East Timor into Indonesia followed unanimous approval by the People's Council of East Timor of a petition asking Indonesia to accept integration of East Timor into Indonesia. Country officer for Indonesia testified in a hearing on the Indonesian invasion that the purpose of U.S. military aid is to keep that area peaceful. The people are relatively happy with the fact that they are now under Indonesia, he said. Well, I won't go on because time is running out, or maybe has run out, but this goes on right up until today. Nothing has changed. The most recent reports that I've seen from they come from Australian journalists who just got kicked out of Indonesia about 3 weeks ago, of Timor about 3 weeks ago, is that terror is increasing, torture is increasing, midnight raids are increasing. He was kicked out summarily from East Timor, and they stole his film, which included film of tortured people who'd been tortured with their ears cut off. He said, while I was there in early April, Indonesian troops were raiding houses and pulling teenagers out to send them to the torture chambers and so on. That's a brief, much too brief sample of the evidence. I wish I shared Ben Anderson's optimism about what all this is going to lead to. In my view, it depends very crucially on what happens here.